Producer Pat here. Just a content note on this week's show. It contains some strong language and may not be suitable for children.
This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for Monday, April 30th, 2018, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Cristina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, checkers.
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to explore the Humboldt tragedy and whose lives matter. And Adam is going to talk about Barbra Streisand and her cloned dogs.
That's right.
But first, Cristina, are mosquitoes choosy biters?
Considering the winter we just had here in Eastern Canada, summer cannot come soon enough. For me anyways. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite pastimes on a nice day is hanging out on our deck streaming sports or Netflix. Unfortunately, the impending arrival of hot, hazy days comes with a major downside. Mosquitoes. Not gonna lie, not a big fan. Mm-hmm. Now, question for you guys, Pat, Darren, Adam. Have you ever been hanging out with a group of people on a summer night and it seems like some people are getting eaten alive by mosquitoes while others seem fairly unaffected?
So for me, I always thought this was about people's hygiene or the beauty products that they were wearing or their underarm deodorant or something like that.
Right. What about you, Adam?
I've certainly noticed it. I would have probably just chalked it up to someone being, more picky or sensitive or reacting differently. But I have heard that there is a color blue that attracts mosquitoes, which I tend to wear a lot.
Interesting. I haven't actually heard the color thing that much. So first, I'd say, yes, I've observed this as well. And then usually someone says, oh, they like me, and someone says they don't like me. And I haven't known exactly why. I thought it might be personal scent or product, but I don't know.
So have you guys ever wondered if there was a reason why some people may get more bitten than others?
Yes.
I guess yes, right?
I mean, I thought I had the answer, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to tell me different.
I'm going to go ahead and say I don't think that mosquitoes treat anyone differently, and I think that people may be just reacting differently or more sensitive about it. Maybe you're about to prove me wrong, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that.
Very interesting. Okay, well, it's not your imagination if some people look like they're getting bitten more than others. Around 10 to 20% of the population get bitten more often than other people. It turns out that mosquitoes are more discerning than some of us gave them credit for. So Craig Benzine, a host of Mental Floss, did a video a couple years back called Why Do Mosquitoes Prefer Biting Some People to Others? Liz Borelli of Medical Daily cited the video in a subsequent article she wrote titled, Genes, Blood Type, and Drinking Beer. Why Some People Are More Prone to Mosquito Bites Than Others. Beer?
Yeah, well, I'm interested in the drinking beer part.
Okay, what's going on here? Let's start with our genes. Genes mandate what our blood type is and the chemical makeup of our skin. And what causes mosquitoes to be attracted to us has 85% to do with genetics.
Wow.
So if you have the perfect combo of genetics and scent, you're their most likely target. University of Florida medical entomologist and mosquito expert Dr. Jonathan Day says, quote, some people produce more of certain chemicals in their skin, and a few of those chemicals, like lactic acid, attract mosquitoes. End quote. Now, lactic acid comes from your sweat glands, and in 1999, it was observed that mosquitoes carrying malaria were most attracted to sweat that had been sitting on the skin for a couple of days versus fresh sweat. They also seem to prefer those who have more of a certain type of bacteria, like Staphylococcus variophorax, on their skin. Now, Day goes on to say, there's also evidence that one blood type, O, attracts mosquitoes more than others.
Ooh, that's my blood type.
So backing up what Dave's saying, Adam, about blood types, there's a study published in the Journal of Medical Entomology in 2004, and they found mosquitoes landed on people with type O blood twice as often as type A.
That is significant.
So people with type B fell somewhere in the middle, but still much less than O. Now, another reason mosquitoes are attracted to us, and I found this particularly interesting, has to do with the amount of carbon dioxide we exhale. So mosquitoes can detect CO2 on our breath from as far as 50 meters or 164 feet away thanks to an organ called a maxillary palp, which has a very sensitive olfactory receptor neuron for carbon dioxide reception.
50 meters is not insignificant.
No, it's not.
That's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
It is crazy. Now, as a result, people who are overweight or pregnant suffer most because they tend to have a higher resting metabolic rate, and that makes them more attractive to mosquitoes.
I've also found that if you're running or exercising or exhaling a lot, that there may be a lot more mosquitoes, and that's a mechanism that could certainly explain it.
Absolutely. It also explains why kids get bitten less often than adults, which I'd never really heard before, but...
They have less surface area, too.
Right.
True.
Yeah. Yep.
A 2002 study published in the Journal of the American Mosquito Control Association found that drinking a 350 milliliter or 12-ounce can of beer can also make you more attractive to mosquitoes. I guess this is some form of reverse beer goggles. That's what it sounds like.
I assume the mosquitoes have been watching the beer commercials and think it's cool. They want to hang out with me.
Now, the researchers measured ethanol content in sweat production, and skin temperature before and after ingestion of 350 milliliters of beer, with an ethanol concentration of 5.5%, by the way. They were able to demonstrate that mosquito landing on volunteer test subjects significantly increased after beer ingestion compared with before ingestion, showing drinking alcohol stimulates mosquito attraction. While the research suspected that this was due to the increase of ethanol excreted through the test subject's sweat or an increase in their body temperature. Mental floss suggested it could be related to CO2, as people tend to breathe more when consuming beer. Okay, so obviously we can't control our genetic risk factors, and who wants to stop drinking beer? Come on. Is there anything we can do to help mitigate mosquito bites? There are a few myths floating around, like eating bananas or taking vitamin B12 can help deter mosquitoes, but those are just old wives' tales.
Oh, good. I don't like bananas.
Believe it or not, wearing lighter clothing can help, since mosquitoes are more attracted to dark clothing. So, Adam, perhaps that's why you feel when you wear blue.
I
don't know.
Yeah, that might make sense. I mean, I had heard blue, but, blue is a darker color. So perhaps when the mosquitoes are attracted to my blue jeans, it's not just my jeans that are attracted.
Well, explain today, mosquitoes have problems flying in even a slight wind, so they keep really close to the ground. Down there, they spot hosts by comparing your silhouette to the horizon. Dark colors stand out, while light shades blend in. By the same token, gesturing or moving around a lot can also attract mosquitoes. Outside of that, experts say using insect repellent with around 24% DEET is the best way to keep mosquitoes at bay. Mm-hmm. By the way, I'll leave you guys with this fun fact. Did you know that it's the female mosquito that bites?
Yes.
I'd heard that. Yes.
Do you know why, Darren?
No.
Because she needs the blood to produce eggs. Mm-hmm. The male mosquitoes feed on flower nectar. Who would have thought that mosquito bites would have made such an interesting topic?
Mm-hmm. I guess you did. Good job.
Mm-hmm.
Christina's topic was mainly on mosquito bites, but mosquitoes are also responsible for many deaths, which then links broadly to my topic of the deaths we think about and what ones we think we can do anything about and how we act and treat others. This segment will be a sensitive one about the nature of life and death and who matters to us and how we act when tragedy strikes. The Humboldt Broncos are a hockey team from Humboldt, a rural town in Saskatchewan. Established in 1970, the Broncos play in the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League, think ages 16 to 21. On April 6th, en route to the game, the Broncos team bus collided with a semi-truck on Highway 35. The accident killed 16 people, some dying about a week afterwards. The victims included 10 players, 2 coaches, a statistician, a broadcaster, the bus driver, and an athletic therapist. The remaining 13 passengers received injuries, most of them serious. Subsequently, a GoFundMe called Funds for Humboldt Broncos was created by Sylvie Kellington, a Humboldt woman whose son played for a youth version of the team called the Broncos Bantam A Team. Joined by Kaylin Hergott, they wanted to find a way to help the victims after the crash became news. Hergott is quoted as saying, "Our original goal was just to pay for coffee and parking for the families at Royal University Hospital, and maybe the meals. We just had very limited goals because we didn't think it would go very far." How have they done? Well, the current GoFundMe page says, over 22 days, 142,000 people have donated a total of $15.18 million
Wow.
Yeah.
of a $4 million goal. First, the original goal was not $4 million, but $10,000, and it was increased when the fund started to raise a lot of money. Coffee, parking, and meals don't cost $4 million.
Sure.
A Global News piece by Rebecca Joseph says, quote, the campaign is the biggest campaign ever in Canada. That's GoFundMe campaign. More than 100,000 people from 65 different countries have donated, including Australia, Spain, France, Switzerland, India, and Peru. It's one of the top 5 in the world, officials from GoFundMe said. So it's not just Canada. This is truly remarkable and represents some of the best qualities of humanity. People felt the suffering of the injured, the survivors, and the devastation in the small community and donated to help them. Further, given how many different countries are involved, and assuming they aren't all Canadian expats, there is some cross-country compassion going on that is heartwarming. Families and the town of Humboldt are being helped by over 140,000 people, most of whom I'm guessing have never heard of Humboldt before this tragedy.
That's very true. I have to throw in there too, Darren, if you're a parent and you have a kid who's like 21 years old, it kind of hits you a little bit harder too.
So what more is there to say? Well, as listeners know, we value critical thinking and explore controversies and curiosities. Heck, it's what I say at the beginning of each show. Consequently, I want to talk a little about Nora Loretto, but first I want to have a higher level discussion about whose lives matter. If you're listening right now, I actually want you to ask yourself, whose lives matter in your life, and why? I'm tempted to give you a couple minutes of dead air to explore that, but that makes poor audio content. So I hope you'll pause this segment and then come back after you've reflected. I'm trusting you. Without trying to be presumptuous, I'm going to guess that your first answers are that your life matters and those of your family members. Then you might have said friends, people in your social network, people you know, your community, town, region, country, and perhaps some of you said all lives matter. And no, not as a silly response to Black Lives Matter. Some of you might have even said all sentient lives matter. Shout out to my Effective Altruist listeners. The question is why? Why those people? Why not others?
Well, you might also consider what Cristina just said. And she said when a 21-year-old child dies, for her, that hits home because she has a 21-year-old child, right? So it's ability to like draw an exact line between someone that matters to you and someone who died. Moreover than geography, moreover than, yeah.
Obviously, people have a strong emotional link to their genetic relatives, close family, and friends. I won't explore that more, as it seems pretty straightforward, but I am curious to examine the realm of people we don't know, across a country or across the world. Empathy and compassion are interesting things, but they are mostly influenced by salient events, like natural disasters or identifiable victims, or if the people are similar to us in some way. Somewhat similar to what Cristina just said, and I wondered, did hockey fans donate more than non-hockey fans? I don't know. In theory, you could try to find that out.
Or people who have children that play hockey.
Exactly.
For example.
Humans also suffer, or benefit, depending on your perspective, from something called scope insensitivity. If I tell you that in 2015, 900 people died in fatal car accidents in Canada, you might think, that's terrible. 900 lives, and the impact on their friends and their families. And I agree. But now suppose I tell you that the real number is higher, as it actually is, because in 2015, 1,852 Canadians died in car accidents. That's a little over twice as many. Do you now feel twice as terrible? If you had planned to do anything, are you now going to double the resources you're investing?
Yep.
I'm guessing not. If you happened to listen to the show last week, I told you that snake bites kill around 100,000 people a year. Did anyone think, wow, that's so many, I should find some anti-snake bite charity to support? I don't think so. But please write in if you did. I'd be very curious to hear that. So we don't care about snake bite victims, but we do care about car accident victims. Well, that's not true. We care about some car accident victims. Actually, unless we know them personally, most people don't care about car accident victims much at all. Now let me clarify that last point. If I asked you, you would say car accidents are terrible. But behaviorally, it's likely doesn't change your actions. Apologize if you work for Mothers Against Drunk Driving or something similar. So what's my point? While difficult, I think we should be a bit more honest with ourselves and others about whose lives we value and why. My experience is that people want it both ways. Many people think that all lives are equal. They act as if only the lives of people they know matter. I can imagine someone saying out loud, yes, Canadian lives matter more than those of any other country, and the lives of those in my community matter more than any other community on Earth. I say imagine because people almost never say this. Of course, there's a wide range of political opinion, and some people definitely believe this, but many people think this is just a bad thing to say. And beyond that, on some level, they might reflect that it is actually a bad thing to think. I'm asking people to reflect on the why, because if you do value local lives so much more, your answer seems like it has to be something like geography as a reason, which doesn't seem that strong a reason. Just because you happen to live in one place, those people's lives matter more? That seems quite arbitrary, because it is. It seems more reasonable to think of objective criteria and universal values when we think about which lives we value and which we let die.
You've pointed out several reasons why some sort of a tragedy or a death might hit home, but I think there are a lot of them. So we've talked about the idea that you can draw a comparison to someone who matters in your life. You can draw on geography. You can draw on any one of a number of things, or just the news cycle because it's in your face. I think your point is, why do you then make the conclusion that this visceral response that you're having for whichever reason is so much greater than a child a million miles away who's not on the news dying every day?
Exactly. In the broad strokes, that's it. It's also interesting that if you're donating from a different country, that child is not a million miles away. They actually might be very close. But now you're donating to people in a different country. For what reason? Again, people have reasons. It's just, what exactly are those? Usually it feels the right thing to do, therefore do it. But let's try to unpack that. And then upon reflection, you're like, no, these are good reasons. I'm still going to do it. That's fine. But maybe you think, oh, maybe I should do that sometimes, but maybe there's other criteria I should think about. I mentioned Nora Loretto before, so who is she anyway? She is a Quebec City writer and organizer who has experienced wrath, harassment, and online terrorism for saying what apparently is unsayable. That we appear to be valuing different lives differently, and that there may be reasons for that. Here's some context. On April 6th, on her Twitter, Nora linked an article about the crash and said, brutal. A day later, on April 7th, she said the Humboldt tragedy is, quote, so terrible, I know that's obvious, but there's really not much more to say. One more day later, April 8th, she linked a story about the GoFundMe that had raised $4 million at that point, with the caption, this is a lot of money. And then a comment on her own tweet, she wrote, I'm trying not to get cynical about what is a totally devastating tragedy, but the maleness, the youthfulness, and the whiteness of the victims are, of course, playing a significant role. And in a subsequent comment, I don't want less for the families and survivors of this tragedy. I want justice and more for so many other grieving parents and communities.
This was a fairly significant conversation on a recent Canada Land as well.
People didn't like this. Right-wing groups sought to make an example of her. I think it is worth reading some of the tweets that responded to her comment. Content warning of horrible things coming up. These are actual tweets in response. I know your uncle molested you when you was young. Fuck you, fat bitch. Go fuck yourself. There's a place in fucking hell for heartless, disrespectful people like yourself. Fuck off, you stupid cunt. Kids fucking died, you stupid bitch. Fuck you. That's just a sample. There's also, of course, the death threats, the wishing she was raped, and so on. Now, this is not where my segment starts to explain how people on the internet are horrible and wrong in various ways, but where I want to highlight the importance of my previous message. The more we can reflect and communicate on exactly why we care about some lives and not others, the more we might be able to disentangle, but still respect, how some people have different priorities or values. Not wrong, just different. Of course, this won't necessarily work, and it definitely won't work for everyone, like pretty much everyone who just commented there, but I think it is worth trying to be better to normalize conversations about who we care about and why. Even if we don't agree with Nora, I hope we can agree that she should not be deserving such vitriol. A possible segment for the future, how terrible Twitter is and how they could choose to make it better if they wanted to. I want to conclude on the words of Celeste Leray-Leicht, who lost her 19-year-old son in the Humboldt Broncos bus crash. Quoted in the Hockey News, there is so much hurt in this province in so many ways, particularly with the First Nations community. There is so much tragedy and affliction in this world, and they don't get the attention they deserve sometimes. I have no idea what this is going to look like, but I want to start a movement of some sort. People are hurting in this province with the whole Colton Bushy trial, and it's time that people reach out. From hurt can come good. Well said.
Wow, what a thing to say when your son died in a bus crash.
Exactly. Now, she has a special place, I think most people think, to say such things.
Right.
It's very interesting how we perceive things that way, right? But someone else cannot say such things, even though other people have tragedy almost all the time. So then only if you've experienced a particular tragedy can you then think about the allocation of resources? That seems a bit silly.
Darren, did you say $14 million?
15.18, and they've actually stopped allowing donations.
So I know this is not what your segment was about, but do we have any idea what they're going to do with over $15 million?
No, I don't. So there's a great article in CBC about what they're going to do with the money, and I think some of it will go to the victims' families, whatever that might mean. There are people who do have some serious injuries, and even though some of that is covered by the province's medical care, and I believe the funerals are also covered by certain associations, people might be requiring long-term care, which can be quite expensive. Beyond that, it is a lot of money, so I'm not exactly sure what they're going to do. They might actually be somewhat constrained, because if you say you're raising money for X, I don't think you can suddenly just do something for Y. But you could imagine memorials or other children's outreach programs or something about traffic safety. I'm not sure.
Well, therapy would probably be helpful too, from anyone who survived the crash, who's suffering from some sort of PTSD. Or,
right. I mean, the whole town is probably devastated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now for something completely different. Barbra Streisand and her cloned dogs. Adam?
That's right, Darren. In early March, Barbra Streisand, a famed actress and singer, casually mentioned in an interview with Variety that 2 of her 3 Coton de Tuileries dogs were clones. I was surprised to hear this, not because I didn't think cloning pets was possible, but rather because the process, when I had looked it up, was expensive and not very reliable. Animal cloning is nothing new. Dolly the sheep was cloned back on the 5th of July, 1996, which resulted in great publicity. This was so long ago that we probably have quite a few listeners who were born later than that. Basically, Dolly's DNA was taken from an adult sheep by taking the cell's nucleus and transferring it into an unfertilized oocyte, or developing egg, which had its nucleus removed. Dolly died younger than expected, living only 6.5 years, short of the 11 or 12-year expected age for her type. There was a lot of concern and speculation that the cloning itself caused her early death. The basic idea was that because Dolly was cloned as an adult, that left her DNA somehow already aged to some extent, making her only have some years left. This sort of essentialism appealed to many, as it makes it seem as if cloning can't cheat death in some kind of way. There is even scientific reasoning that was given to explain this, and that idea was that Dolly's telomeres were short, and short telomeres are the result of aging. Now, these ideas were not legitimate, as extensive health screening showed no abnormalities in Dolly that would have come from advanced aging. Dolly simply died after being afflicted with a form of lung cancer which is common for sheep and which affected others in her flock. Not every sheep or every person reaches their anticipated life expectancy. This is an average. Many other cloned sheep did not have any problems, including 4 identical clones of Dolly who were all alive and healthy at 9 years old as of 2016. But cloning isn't easy. Dolly was the only lamb born from 277 cloning attempts. So we heard about this news, but we didn't hear about everyone that didn't work. Now, I don't recall exactly when I first did research on cloning pets. I thought for sure it was research for a segment on the reality check, but upon investigation, found that I never did such a segment. This was possibly something I looked up shortly after the death of my beloved cat Cracker back in 2011, but I'm not sure. Anyway, at the time, a company had made some waves in the media for cloning some cats, so Genetic Saving and Clone provided commercial cloning, of which the first was named Little Nicky, a cloned cat. Now, this cost her owner some $50,000 US, and despite the cost in dollars, there was also the concern that many failed cloning attempts were leading to stillborn or miscarried attempted clones for each one that made it to birth. That's a bit of an ethical concern there. Now, they had some success in cloning cats, but despite some research in dog cloning, they never offered the service to the public and ultimately closed down in 2006, which at the time was the end of the pet cloning business. Now, this is why I was a bit surprised from the news from Barbra Streisand. Evidently, this was not the end for good. Dog cloning for most of the next decade continued mostly in South Korea, where the Soam Biotech Research Foundation has cloned over 600 dogs.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's happened quite a bit. So what's up with Barbra Streisand's dogs? Barbra Streisand had a Coton de Tuileries dog, Samantha, who died in 2017 at the age of 14. She had the vet take cells from Samantha's cheek and belly before her death and had them sent to Viagen Pets in Texas. While waiting for her clones, the breeder from which she got Samantha brought her another dog who she adopted and named Miss Fanny. 5 clones of Samantha were born, with one dying shortly after birth. Barbara thought that taking all 4 surviving dogs would be too much, and so her manager's assistant took one, and the other went to the daughter of her A&R man. Now, I had to look this up, and this means artists and repertoire, which is some sort of music industry executive. Cristina or Pat, would you care to elaborate on what that means?
An A&R executive has the position in a label of seeking out, acquiring talent. So they're the guys and gals that you'd see at a show, checking out new artists, new bands. Scouting, basically. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So basically, she ended up keeping 2 of those clones, and she dressed them in red and lavender to tell them apart, and so they are called Miss Scarlet and Miss Violet. Now, she says that each of her dogs is unique and has her own personality. As she says it, you can clone the look of a dog, but you can't clone the soul. Still, every time I look at their faces, I think of my Samantha and smile. Well, this is touching, but also a fairly unscientific statement since souls aren't a real thing. Still, the comment is interesting, as she suggests that a dog's personality is not retained in a clone. And this comment was repeated by a lot of media sources, as it seems to give potential insight into cloning. This is certainly going to be true to some extent, with not all of an animal's personality being solely the result of genes. And this is true of humans, as we can see in twins who don't have identical personalities, and likely would be the same for dogs or cats. Still, genetics are a strong predictor for physical and mental traits. A lot of one's personality will be the result of their genes or the nature rather than their nurture, but that won't be the full picture. Now, it would certainly be interesting to observe the behavior of a cloned pet to see what traits remain and which ones change. Certainly, those differences, be they small or large, would be the things that one might notice. So one might pick up more on the differences than the similarities, and that would be why they might say, oh, totally different personality there. Now, in addition to this, there could also potentially be changes in the fur patterns of the clones. Now, I don't know much about dog coat genetics, but when I was researching my segment on the science of gremlins, I learned that cat coat patterns in female cats were not uniquely genetically determined, but rather that spots were determined by the way the embryonic cells divided into clusters because of X inactivation of one chromosome or another. Basically, a cloned tortoiseshell or calico cat would not likely have the same patterns as the original. So if you're cloning to have that exact same look, probably not going to happen.
You knew that Gremlins research was going to come in sooner or later.
I'm glad I did it.
On the daily.
Viagen, who cloned Barbra Streisand's dogs, charged $50,000 US to clone a dog, $25,000 to clone a cat, and they will store your pet's DNA for $1,600 US. The cloning involves a similar process to the way Dolly the sheep was cloned way back in the day. There are a number of surgeries done to dogs in order to make this happen. Egg cells are harvested from up to a dozen dogs in heat, and once the genetic material is inserted into the cell, there is then another surgery needed to transplant that fertilized oocyte back into a surrogate mother dog. Ultimately, I found Streisand's story quite touching and find the advances in pet cloning to be a fascinating and potentially promising development. The public reaction to the story, however, included a lot of criticism, as it is evident that many people are very ideologically opposed to this basic idea. The ethical concerns are a bit out of scope from what we usually talk about on the show, but ultimately they seem to stem from the same kind of attitudes which have many people who want people to, and I quote, adopt not shop, and get rescue animals instead of buying them.
You're right, Adam. We never talk about ethics on the show.
Well, I'm just saying that we can inform our ethical choices, but I'm not going to tell you what's right to think or feel. Now, as a cat person, I've happily adopted most of my cats. This is sort of the default for cats. Most people don't buy cats. And after adopting 3 strays over the years, I'm not ashamed to say that I went to a breeder to get our Siberian cat, Katniss, after having visited the Café Chat Sibérien a number of times in Chelsea. After the cafe closed down last year, we also adopted Kalinka, another designer Siberian cat, this time a retired celebrity from that cat cafe. There are many reasons to choose one option over another, perhaps more frequently with dogs having many breeds, or someone wanting one from a young age, and I don't think it's fair to vilify someone simply for their choice in the matter. One article, for example, compared the $50,000 cost of Streisand's clone to the $125 adoption fee for rescue dogs of a similar breed. Barbra Streisand is worth about $340 million, so I'm not sure cost was really a factor in that decision. She established the Barbra Streisand Foundation in 1986, and that foundation has given $25 million to over 800 organizations over the years. Now, this mainly includes women's health issues, progressive causes like women's equality, and environmentalism. Pet cloning is possible. It's an expensive process which requires surgery to a number of dogs and which has some failures. But if you've got money, like Barbra Streisand, it is an option. The process is controversial, and there are many who oppose it, but as the technology improves, I can only imagine pet cloning will likely become more common, short of it becoming somehow illegal. Adopt, shop, or clone as it suits your needs and your budget. I'm not going to be a jerk about what you choose to do, but some people almost certainly will.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks for joining us once again, listeners. Cristina explored why mosquitoes are choosy biters and explored a number of factors, including CO2 in your genetics. I looked at the Humboldt tragedy and asked you to reflect on whose lives matter to you and why. And Adam looked into Barbra Streisand and her cloned dogs. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Let me say all that again. After someone finishes their sink, this is funny, the TRC Studios, Ottawa. There's sirens, there's a sink, there's light in my eye, there's the fridge going.
Good thing we got all these baffles up all around our...
It would be people like, wow, the audio quality's really gotten half better.
Yeah. The company named Genetic Savings and Clone provided commercial...
Let's just enjoy that for a moment.